This is not a story about an $8,000 electric car that Americans can buy tomorrow. That car does not exist in a US showroom, and that is exactly the point. In 2025, after discounts and government trade-in support, one small BYD electric car in China could be pushed below 56,000 yuan, roughly $7,750, less than many used cars in America. Now imagine trying to build that same kind of car in Detroit. American wages, American battery costs, American factories, American politics, and then imagine trying to make a profit. That gap between what China can build and what the West can build affordably is the whole story. Not one cheap car, a price war, and the question of who survives it. BYD is not cutting prices in a vacuum. China's car market has been locked in a price war since 2023, with automakers fighting for scale, market share, and survival in the world's largest auto market. By 2025, BYD had pushed incentives across more than 20 models, and competitors were forced to respond. Then something unusual happened. Beijing itself started telling the industry to calm down. Chinese regulators and industry groups warned that the price war was damaging profits, hurting suppliers, and threatening the long-term health of the sector. Think about that. The country leading global EV production was asking its own automakers to ease off the pressure. That is not a normal sale. That is a survival contest. So why can BYD fight a price war like this and still remain one of the strongest players? The easy answer is subsidies, and subsidies are part of the debate. The European Union has built an entire trade case around the argument that Chinese EVs benefit from unfair state support. But subsidies alone do not explain the size of the advantage. BYD's edge comes from batteries, scale, vertical integration, and a dense supplier network built around China's EV boom. The company started as a battery maker. It controls more of its own supply chain than most traditional automakers. It builds at enormous volume, and it competes in a home market where price pressure is constant. Zoom out, and the scale is staggering. In 2025, Chinese automakers supplied about 60% of global electric car sales. China produced nearly 3/4 of the world's electric cars, and China accounted for more than 80% of global battery cell production. That is not just a discount. That is an industrial base, and you cannot tariff your way into one of those overnight. But here is the part that often gets missed. A price war can grow your market share and still damage your profits, and even BYD is not immune. In 2025, BYD's annual net profit fell 19% to about 32.6 billion yuan. That was its first annual profit decline in 4 years. Now, to be clear, BYD is not collapsing. This is still a giant company with massive scale, a growing overseas business, and one of the strongest EV supply chains in the world. But that is exactly why the number matters. If the strongest player in China's EV price war is feeling margin pressure, imagine what this kind of competition does to companies trying to catch up from behind, especially companies in Europe. And especially companies in Detroit. Europe has a problem it cannot easily solve. It wants cleaner cars, it wants more affordable EVs, and it wants to protect one of its most important industrial sectors. But the cheapest route to affordable EV adoption may run through Chinese supply chains. That creates a brutal trade-off. If Europe keeps Chinese EVs out, consumers may pay more for the electric cars governments want them to buy. If Europe lets them in too freely, domestic automakers and suppliers face much stronger pressure. So the EU chose a middle path. Not a ban, a tariff. After an anti-subsidy investigation, the EU added extra duties on China-built electric vehicles, 17% for BYD, 18.8% for Geely, and 35.3% for SAC, on top of the standard 10% car import duty. China disputes the EU's conclusions. Chinese automakers have challenged the duties in court, so Europe did not build a wall. It built a toll booth. And a toll booth slows traffic. It does not stop it. Then came the moment that made the shift feel real. In April 2025, BYD registered more battery electric cars in Europe than Tesla for the first time. The margin was tiny, about 7,231 BYD battery electric registrations, compared with about 7,165 for Tesla. Tesla, and this needs to be said carefully. 1 month, 1 region, battery electric registrations only. BYD did not suddenly dominate Europe, but symbols matter. A Chinese automaker edging past Tesla in Europe, even briefly, showed how quickly the competitive map can change. It was not the end of Tesla, it was a warning shot for everyone else. Europe now faces 3 uncomfortable choices. Door 1. Protect. Use tariffs and trade rules to slow China-built EVs, but risk keeping prices higher for consumers. Door 2. Open. Let cheaper cars in, speed up EV adoption, and accept more pressure on European factories. Door 3. Localize. Push Chinese companies and European automakers into local production, partnerships, and joint ventures, so the competition becomes part of Europe's own industrial base. And you can already see Europe moving toward Door 3. Stellantis has been working with Chinese partners, including Dongfeng and Leapmotor-related strategies, to bring new energy vehicles into Europe through sales, production, engineering, and distribution arrangements. This is the new shape of the car industry, not just country versus country, factory location versus factory location, supply chain versus supply chain, and brand versus brand. Now, cross the Atlantic, America looks safer. The United States has not built a toll booth, it has built something much closer to a wall. In 2024, the US raised tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles to 100% on top of the normal auto import duty. It also raised tariffs on lithium-ion EV batteries from 7.5% to 25%. At those levels, China-built BYD passenger cars are effectively blocked from competing directly in the US mass market. And even in 2026, Chinese automakers still describe the American market as something for the future, not a simple next step. So yes, Detroit has protection, but protection is not the same as competitiveness. A tariff wall can keep a BYD out. It cannot by itself make Ford or GM build a profitable $25,000 EV. The wall buys time. It does not build the car. Behind that wall, Detroit is caught in a squeeze. First, EVs are still expensive to build. Second, tariffs can raise the cost of parts, materials, and supply chains. Third, customers still want cars they can actually afford. General Motors has already had to rethink parts of its EV strategy. In 2025, GM said it would take a $1.6 billion charge as it adjusted EV capacity after US policy changes and weaker than expected demand. Ford has also warned that tariffs could hit operating profit by about $1.5 billion. This does not mean the EV transition is over. That would be too simple. It means the transition is getting more uneven, more price-sensitive, and more political. The problem is not that nobody wants electric cars. The problem is that many people want electric cars at prices legacy automakers struggle to deliver profitably. The sticker price is only the visible part. Behind it sits a battery supply chain, a mineral supply chain, power electronics, software, chips, factory design, supplier density, and years of brutal domestic competition that forced Chinese automakers to learn how to cut costs fast. This is why the cheap labor explanation is too shallow. The West is not competing with one car, it is competing with an ecosystem. In China, the suppliers, batteries, components, and manufacturing know-how are packed close together. In the US and Europe, governments are trying to rebuild pieces of that ecosystem, but industrial ecosystems are not created by press release. They take time, they take volume, and they take repeated failure before the costs come down. And here is the twist. BYD does not actually want to be known only as the cheap EV company. Low-cost scale helped it win at home, but abroad, BYD is trying to climb the ladder. Its premium Denza brand has been expanding in Europe, and BYD has been pushing higher-margin models as part of a broader effort to improve brand image and profitability. That matters because the cheap EV is not the final form, it is the foot in the door. At the bottom of the market, BYD uses scale to pressure rivals. At the top, it tries to prove that Chinese automakers can compete on technology, design, and prestige. That is what makes the threat more complicated. If BYD were only cheap, Western automakers could dismiss it. But if it can move from cheap to good and from good to premium, the old playbook breaks. So, what does BYD's price war mean for Detroit and Europe? For Europe, it is a dilemma. Cheap Chinese EVs could help consumers and speed up electrification, but they also put pressure on factories, suppliers, and political promises about green jobs. For Detroit, it is a warning. Tariffs can block direct competition, at least for now, but they cannot solve the deeper affordability problem. And for consumers, this may be the first real pressure in years toward an EV that ordinary people can afford. The direction of the market is hard to ignore. In 2025, electric cars made up about a quarter of global new car sales. In 2026, the International Energy Agency expects that share to rise to 28%. So, the central question is not simply gasoline versus electric. The harder question is this: who can build the affordable EV and still survive the price? The wall buys time. It does not answer the question.